Picture this. You are fast asleep. It's 3:00 a.m. on a Tuesday, and suddenly your phone just lights up your nightstand.
Oh, I already know where this is going. The dreaded middle of the night phantom vibration.
Exactly. It is buzzing relentlessly. So you grab it, you're squinting through the glare, and it's this frantic, all-caps notification from your team's messaging app.
Let me guess. A server crashed.
The primary client server has completely crashed. So adrenaline floods your system, right? You stumble out of bed, drag your laptop into the kitchen, open it in the dark.
Sweating, panic typing. I mean, I've been there. As a
Yeah.
project manager, that is my literal nightmare.
Right. And you're just frantically digging into the back end, running diagnostics, trying to parse this messy, totally disorganized thread of panicked coworkers.
Who are undoubtedly all just talking over each other in text.
Yes, which is the absolute worst medium for a crisis. Anyway, 5 grueling hours later, the sun is finally coming up, the issue is stabilized. And that is the exact moment you realize something utterly soul-crushing.
That you didn't even have the admin permissions to fix it in the first place.
You never had the permissions. You were just caught in the crossfire of this poorly directed digital panic.
You know, it is the ultimate nightmare scenario for anyone managing projects today. Because what makes that story so terrifying to a modern workforce isn't really the server going down.
Right. I mean, technology fails all the time.
Exactly. The real terror comes from the realization that the chaos was purely a communication failure. You had a group of highly intelligent people, all the tools right in front of them, and they completely failed to convey who was doing what.
And who actually owned the problem? Well, as a workplace communication consultant, I can tell you the financial toll of those exact failures is staggering.
Oh, I believe it.
We are looking at recent data from Axios HQ, and they found that ineffective communication is currently costing businesses over $15,000 per employee every single year.
Wait, really? $15,000 per employee?
Every single year. So if you take a mid-sized company of just 100 people, that is $1.5 million evaporating into thin air.
Wow.
Just because we cannot figure out how to effectively transfer knowledge through our screens.
It acts as this massive, invisible tax on the bottom line. I mean, you look at a distributed team and think, these are incredibly talented, highly compensated professionals.
Right.
But put them in a remote environment without the proper structural guardrails, and suddenly they are duplicating each other's work. They're missing critical deadlines, burning out at an unprecedented rate.
Because moving to remote work didn't just change where we sit with our laptops. It fundamentally altered the entire psychological landscape of how human beings connect.
How we interpret intent and how we collaborate.
And that psychological shift is our mission for this deep dive today. We have a really robust stack of sources to unpack, ranging from behavioral psychology research to frameworks developed by leaders of remote-first tech companies.
It's going to be a good one.
We are going to explore the hidden architecture of why distributed teams fail to understand each other. But more importantly, we want to build a practical operational playbook to fix it for you.
Because we are living in a bizarre paradox right now.
We are. We have access to more high-fidelity, instantaneous software tools than at any point in human history. Yet we're experiencing a massive deficit in genuine human understanding.
So to unpack that paradox, we have to look past the software itself, because I've seen that happen before. Before a team can optimize their digital workspaces, they really have to diagnose the human element.
Absolutely. The root cause of remote miscommunication is almost never technical latency or a bad Wi-Fi connection. It is the sudden jarring loss of shared physical context.
Which is huge.
We've basically stripped away the environment that naturally calibrates human interaction.
Simon Sinek actually frames this beautifully in the sources. He points out that historically, trust in the workplace does not form during formal meetings.
Right. It doesn't happen when you're going through a slide deck.
No, trust happens in the margins. It happens between the meetings. It's that 2 minutes before a high-stakes client presentation where you are standing in the hallway, adjusting your notes, just chatting about your weekend.
Or walking out of a conference room and turning to a colleague to ask what they really thought of that proposal.
Exactly. Or simply bumping into someone in the kitchen while making coffee. Those seem like completely throwaway moments, but neurologically, they are crucial.
You are learning a colleague's baseline.
Right. You learn how they sound when they are stressed, when they are being sarcastic, or when they are genuinely excited. Cumulatively, those moments build a bedrock of psychological safety.
And in a fully remote setup, those crucial margins are just erased. They're replaced by these incredibly rigid calendar invites.
Well, 100%.
You log on at exactly 10:00 a.m., you ensure you are perfectly framed in your digital square, you deliver a highly rehearsed status update, and at 10:59 you click Leave Meeting.
And the screen just goes black.
There is zero transition space to process the interaction with your peers. Amber Ludman, who gave a really fascinating TEDx talk on this subject, describes this shift as a literal loss of humanity in our working relationships.
That's a strong phrase, loss of humanity.
It is, but it's accurate. When your entire interaction with a human being is filtered through scheduled video calls and asynchronous text, you are receiving a highly sanitized, one-dimensional version of them.
They cease to be a multifaceted colleague. They basically become a two-dimensional avatar whose sole purpose is to either deliver tasks or block your progress.
And think about the mechanics of how that mutates conflict resolution. In a shared physical office, if you propose an idea that frustrates a coworker, you receive instantaneous nonverbal feedback.
Right, you might see their jaw clench or notice them shift defensively in their chair.
And our biology is hardwired to recognize those microexpressions. It immediately triggers empathy. Your brain recognizes the friction, and you naturally soften your tone.
You clarify your intent in real time, but remotely. Tension is met with a muted microphone and a turned-off camera.
Which creates a biological void. And the human brain abhors a void, especially in a professional setting where your livelihood is on the line.
Yeah.
So it fills that void with anxiety.
You're left sitting alone in your home office, pacing the floor, totally convinced your colleague is furious with your proposal.
When in reality, they might have simply turned off their camera because their internet connection was lagging, or, I don't know, a dog was barking.
But because you're operating in a silo, that perceived tension just spirals out of control.
Now, I completely agree with all of this, although, let me push back for a second. Wasn't that isolation partially the selling point?
What do you mean?
Well, the initial promise of remote work, especially for introverts, was that it would strip away all of that messy office politics.
Yeah.
The idea is that you wouldn't have to play the corporate game or manage everyone's emotions. You could just focus purely on the output.
That's true. It was pitched that way.
But looking at these sources, removing that informal context feels akin to reading a complex novel that only has plot points but absolutely zero character development. You might technically reach the end of the project, but you have no investment in anyone involved.
That analogy captures the danger perfectly. Remote work initially felt like a tremendous victory for introverted professionals or deep work specialists.
Right.
But true, sustainable team health actually requires a shared sacrifice of comfort. Sinek emphasizes that if a culture is going to survive long-term, introverts have to recognize the strategic need to intentionally connect.
Just as extroverts have to respect boundaries and quiet hours.
Exactly. If you only focus on the raw output, you lose the richness of your own talent pool. Ludin shares a fascinating story about this dynamic regarding a mentorship gap. She managed a remote employee named Nicole.
Oh, right, the employee who was hired straight out of journalism program.
Yes. So Nicole was hired primarily to function as a creative director. But because Ludman was managing her from over 1,000 miles away, their relationship devolved into a purely transactional exchange.
Just sending files back and forth.
Exactly. Ludeman would send a creative brief via email, and Nicole would return the completed graphic assets. Based solely on those sanitized text-based interactions, Ludeman mentally categorized Nicole as strictly a creative execution type.
But that wasn't the whole picture.
Not at all. A business partner who actually happened to share a local co-working space with Nicole called Ludeman one day to correct the record. They pointed out that Ludeman was completely misreading her own employee.
Because in person, Nicole was totally different.
Yes. In person, Nicole was highly analytical. She asked brilliant structural questions about business strategy. But by managing purely for output through a digital screen, Ludeman had completely missed the strategic capabilities of her own team member.
Wow. And because we've lost those natural physical cues, because we cannot rely on the hallway chats or seeing someone lean in with an insightful question, we can no longer hope that empathy and understanding will just happen organically.
We have to manufacture them.
Exactly. We have to intentionally manufacture empathy. And that shift elevates emotional intelligence, or EQ, from a supplementary soft skill into a rigorous operational necessity.
The psychologist Daniel Goleman actually broke EQ down into specific, actionable components. For remote environments, two of those components, self-awareness and self-regulation, become the absolute bedrock of daily survival.
You must develop the capacity to monitor your own emotional triggers when you're staring at a screen for 8 hours a day, totally isolated from context.
Can you give me an example of how companies are actually operationalizing that?
Yeah, let's ground that in some real-world applications. Several remote-first companies are doing this brilliantly. Take Zapier, for
The
instance.
automation company.
Right. When their engineering teams are facing a massive infrastructure issue or a critical deadline, they don't just rely on individual grit. They actively institutionalize finding a cool-down moment.
Interesting. How does that work?
If a developer feels their stress spiking, they are structurally encouraged to step away from the keyboard. They intentionally break the reactivity loop instead of firing off a panicked message that spreads anxiety across the organization.
That's smart. It stops the contagion effect.
Exactly. Or look at Buffer. They place a heavy emphasis on tone anticipation. Before an employee hits send on a text-based message, they are trained to read it out loud, actively evaluating how the tone might be received by someone having a terrible day.
Oh, that is such a good practice.
And Asana approaches it by tracking engagement cues. If an employee notices a teammate, who is usually vocal, suddenly goes quiet on video calls, or they stop contributing to shared documents, the culture dictates a proactive private check-in.
So they don't wait for a quarterly performance review.
No, they ask if everything is okay in the moment. It artificially replicates the natural check-in you would do in a physical office if a colleague looked exhausted at their desk.
That Asana approach is vital. But applying this kind of remote EQ becomes exponentially more difficult when you introduce geographic scale. You have to account for profound cultural differences colliding with time zone latency.
Oh, the time zone issue is massive.
Imagine a highly direct, efficiency-focused developer based in London. They encounter a bug and send a blunt two-word message to a project manager in San Francisco.
And San Francisco has a work culture that places a high value on conversational warmth. Lots of soft introductions.
Right. So the manager wakes up, reads the blunt message, and instantly interprets it as an aggressive attack on their competence.
And the developer in London is already offline. They're fast asleep by the time the San Francisco manager even reads it.
Exactly. The manager is left to sit with that perceived hostility for an entire workday before any clarification can happen.
So let's follow that exact thread. A developer pushes a code review or a status update that simply reads, "This structure won't work, fix it." The recipient logs on and sees it.
Ouch.
Right. So how does a team with highly operationalized EQ diffuse that specific friction before it hardens into a toxic standoff?
Well, in a low EQ environment, the recipient's ego takes the hit. They get defensive. They fire back a passive-aggressive counter-argument defending the structure.
And then the developer eventually wakes up, feels their expertise is being questioned, and retaliates.
And suddenly you have a sprawling 40-message thread that derails the entire project all over a perceived slight. But in a high EQ environment, the recipient employs that self-regulation we discussed.
They pause.
They read, "This structure won't work, fix it." They might feel their initial blood pressure spike, but they actively manufacture context. They tell themselves, this person is 8 hours ahead. They were likely rushing to close out their sprint.
And in their local working culture, brevity is considered a sign of respect for my time, not an insult.
Exactly. They assume positive intent. Then, crucially, instead of escalating the argument in the same text thread, they reply with something like, "Just saw this note. Let's schedule a quick 5-minute video sync tomorrow morning to align."
They give the benefit of the doubt, and they change the medium.
Changing the medium is where the psychological theory meets operational design. You can possess a massive amount of empathy, but if you are trying to resolve a complex emotional misunderstanding inside a JIRA ticket, you are going to fail.
The platform strips away the nuance. We have to pivot from analyzing how we speak to controlling where we speak. And let's be honest, most organizations are currently drowning in tool overload.
Tool overload is paralyzing. An average team might use Slack for quick chats, Microsoft Teams for video, email for external clients, Notion for documentation, and text messages for emergencies.
It's chaos. To navigate it, Liam from Running Remote developed a framework called Liam's Hierarchy of Communication. It establishes a clear order of operations.
I love this framework.
It's so simple. In-person communication beats video. Video beats audio. Audio beats instant messaging. And instant messaging beats email.
Because it functions as a spectrum of trade-offs. As you move up the hierarchy toward video or in-person interactions, you gain maximum fidelity.
You receive the critical nonverbal data.
Right. The tone of voice, the pacing, the facial expressions. You get an instantaneous feedback loop. But as you move down the hierarchy, relying on asynchronous chat or email, You sacrifice that rich fidelity in exchange for the ability to do deep, focused work without constant interruptions.
And understanding when to move up and down that hierarchy determines whether a team thrives or collapses. The platform Fellow.app developed a philosophy around this called high-fidelity escalation.
Which is brilliant.
Their core operational rule is simple. If you think you disagree with someone, assume you misunderstood them.
That is a great rule to live by.
The moment you detect friction, confusion, or defensiveness in a text-based tool, you are instructed to short-circuit the debate. You do not try to win an argument by typing paragraphs into a chat window. You immediately jump up the hierarchy and initiate a video or voice call.
They illustrate this with the aspirin decision analogy, which I use all the time now. Think about the sheer volume of hours remote teams waste debating inconsequential tactical details via asynchronous text.
Should the button be blue or green?
Should we run this process on Tuesday or Wednesday? People will spend an entire afternoon carefully crafting perfectly worded arguments, completely stalling the momentum of the project.
Over text.
Right. High-fidelity escalation mandates that you stop typing. You recognize that the medium is slowing you down. You call the person, hash out the nuances in 3 minutes, make a definitive choice, and move forward.
But here's where it gets interesting.
Yeah.
Doesn't instantly calling someone violate the fundamental promise of asynchronous remote work?
No.
Well, the defining benefit of async culture is the protection of deep, focused time. If we start initiating voice calls every single time there's a minor disagreement or a point of confusion, aren't we just digitally recreating the constant shoulder tapping of a noisy open-plan office?
That tension is the central balancing act of distributed management. The distinction relies entirely on the purpose of the communication.
Okay, break that down.
Text-based asynchronous tools are unparalleled for building institutional memory. If you are documenting a new software process or delivering a routine weekly status update, that information must live in text so colleagues can digest it on their own schedule.
So text is for transferring data.
Yes.
Yeah.
But text is utterly disastrous for resolving complex strategic problems or navigating emotional friction. The objective is not to interrupt people indiscriminately. The objective is to eliminate minute-itis.
Ah, the classic, hey, do you have a minute? Slack message that inevitably ruins a flow state.
Precisely. Remote communication cannot be haphazard. It must be deeply purposeful. You protect your team's ability to do deep work by strictly using asynchronous text for routine updates.
But you protect the team's psychological momentum by ruthlessly escalating to a scheduled, high-fidelity call the second a conversation becomes ambiguous.
You are separating the transfer of static information from the collaborative resolution of conflict.
But relying on individuals to instinctively know how to balance that tension is a recipe for disaster. You cannot simply stand in front of a company and declare communicate better. Organizations must engineer structural guardrails.
Without them, knowledge silos form, vital context is lost, and employees end up operating in frustrating isolation.
Creating those guardrails means building a remote communication operating system. Sometimes it's referred to as a team charter. It is a codified manual that removes the guesswork from daily collaboration.
And the backbone of any effective operating system is the establishment of clear SLA service-level agreements for internal tools.
This is the mechanical cure for the always-on anxiety that drives remote burnout.
It really is. It is one thing to tell employees to balance their time, but it is another to explicitly state in a company charter. We expect a response on instant messaging within 4 hours. We expect an email reply within 24 hours.
And phone calls are strictly reserved for server crashing emergencies.
Exactly. When leadership actually models and enforces those specific timeframes, the psychology of the team shifts. You no longer experience a spike of panic every time a notification dot appears because the baseline expectation has been clearly negotiated.
And you pair those rigid SLAs with the strict enforcement of the DRI, the directly responsible individual.
Which is so crucial. In a physical meeting, a vague consensus might form where someone says, we should really update the client on these timeline changes. In an office, you might organically sort out who does that as you walk back to your desks.
Hey, do you want to email them or should I?
Exactly, but remotely. If a virtual meeting ends with, we should do this, absolutely nothing happens. The task dissolves into the digital ether.
Because without a specific DRI formally attached to a task before the video call ends, ownership evaporates. And that failure of accountability ties directly into the practice of decision hygiene.
Decision hygiene is arguably the most powerful mechanical fix we've discussed today. It involves maintaining centralized, accessible decision logs.
It means mandating that every meeting generates a written summary of outcomes and utilizing asynchronous templates like the weekly progress plans blockers update.
The golden rule of decision hygiene is ruthless, but necessary. If a strategic decision is not documented in the central project management platform, the decision did not happen.
Let's examine the reality of a company that lacks that hygiene.
Oh, I've seen it. When you operate without centralized logs and clear DRIs, your project controls disintegrate. An engineer might spend 2 weeks developing a workaround for a software bug, completely unaware that a colleague in another time zone solved the exact same issue a month ago.
But they buried the solution in a private direct message.
Exactly. So the company pays for duplicated work, internal SLAs are missed, and inevitably, that chaotic internal infrastructure leaks outward.
Product launches are delayed, quality control drops, and clients lose trust.
Not because the team lacked talent, but because they lacked the hygiene to keep their internal narrative straight.
Let's distill this deep dive into actionable strategy for everyone listening. We've covered the biological anxiety of missing physical cues, the necessity of operationalizing emotional intelligence, and the mechanics of designing communication systems. How can you apply this complex architecture to your own teams?
It really comes down to 3 operational shifts. First, adopt the principle of high-fidelity escalation. When you detect friction, defensiveness, or ambiguity in a text-based medium, stop typing.
Do not attempt to win an argument in a sprawling chat thread.
Assume you have misunderstood their intent and immediately escalate to voice or video to resolve the tension with full human context.
Second, actively design your team's operating system. Remove the guesswork that breeds anxiety. Document crystal-clear service-level agreements for response times across all platforms. Assign a directly responsible individual to every action item before a meeting concludes.
And enforce strict decision hygiene by logging every outcome in a centralized public space.
Finally, take responsibility for manufacturing the in-between. The organic moments that naturally build trust in a physical office are gone. You must intentionally recreate them.
Apply your emotional intelligence to check in on colleagues when their digital behavior changes. Turn your camera on during difficult conversations to provide vital, nonverbal feedback. Actively rebuild the social fabric that remote work naturally deteriorates.
Now, as you process these frameworks, I want to leave you with a really fascinating reflection raised by Mark Mortensen in his TED Talk regarding the psychology of remote work.
Oh, the commute point.
Yes. We frequently celebrate the elimination of the daily commute. We view that reclaimed hour or two as a massive victory for work-life balance. We tell ourselves we're using that extra time to read, to exercise, or to decompress. But are you actually doing that?
Probably not. Because your primary workspace is now located 10 feet away from your kitchen, you essentially have exactly 6 seconds to transition between closing a stressful spreadsheet and immediately re-entering the dynamic of your family life.
Mortensen argues that for generations, humanity relied on 3 distinct spaces: the home, the workplace, and the community transition space.
The commute was the transition space.
Exactly. Remote work hasn't just blurred the boundaries between those spaces. For many of us, it has collapsed them entirely into a single screen. Consider how the complete lack of a transition period is impacting your nervous system, your ability to set boundaries, and ultimately the empathy you bring to both your professional and personal communications.
That is definitely something to think about. Thank you for joining us as we explored the architecture of remote collaboration. Take these frameworks, document your team's operating system, and practice immediate escalation the next time you sense friction in a chat thread.
And hopefully, the next time the servers go down at 3:00 a.m., you will sleep right through it, entirely confident that the right person, communicating on the right channel, already has the situation completely under control. Keep diving deep, and we will catch you next time.